G'day, welcome back. This is the next video in my series on World Chess Championship blunders, and now we are covering the 2000 match between Vladimir Kramnik and Garry Kasparov. So let's have a look at how this match came about. So here's the Wikipedia page, and we can see here that Kramnik won this game 8.5, 6.5, and that's the last we'll see of Kasparov. The background of this match was a bit unusual. There's this idea of candidates matches. Kasparov wanted to play Anand, who was the highest rated player, and that fell through a couple of times. And then Shirov won this sort of candidates match against Kramnik to sort of qualify and get the right to the match. Financial agreement couldn't be reached. I think the problem is there was not much interest in a match between Shirov and Kasparov, given the fact Kasparov had a very strong record against him, and then eventually that fell through, and then finally you had a match against Kramnik. And you have a look at the rating difference. I mean, Kasparov was still like peak rating, but obviously towards the end of his career, and Kramnik was, I think, number 3 in the world. So, pretty strong matchup. And then this is famous for, obviously Kramnik beat Kasparov, something which Karpov could not do. And I think apart from the match itself, there's this lasting legacy that Kramnik used the Berlin defense to totally stymie Kasparov on the white side of the Roy Lopez, and he also basically busted Kasparov's Grunfeld defense, and then he started playing the Nimzo Indian. And the 2 games which Kramnik won as white, one against Grunfeld and one against the Nimzo Indian. So that's how sort of the match progressed. There's also this article, just highlight, quite recent, October 2025, on ChessBase website, talks about the match, goes over those games 2 and games 10. We're going to cover games 4, 6, and 10 because obviously we're looking at the ones with blunders in them, which had sort of a meaningful impact. There's Raymond Keane, Organized Brain Games. You can read that article at your leisure. And then, as I said, games 4, 6, and 10 are the ones we are going to be going over. And you can see I've got it set up here. You can look at the match score there. That is the game 2 loss by Kasparov in the Grunfeld. Here's the game 10 loss by Kasparov in the Nimzo Indian, and then there's a sort of a 2-game gap, and then all the games were drawn, and the match overall then went to Kramnik. There was no rematch organized like there was in some other arrangement. So that was the last we see of Kasparov at the World Chess Champions. And we're going to look at the game 4 first, which is a very interesting position. You can see I've set the position up there, and you've got Kramnik with the extra piece. Kasparov has extra pawn, and the key to this position, which is in this current position we've got, is winning. If White cannot hold his A pawn, then he'll probably win. And those blunders which are showing up in this game, first by Kramnik winning down to drawing, Kasparov a 1-move blunder which Kramnik did take advantage of, is all about whether White can maintain his A pawn and therefore win the game. In the process, I mean, obviously the 2 black pawns are probably going to drop, but it's all about the A pawn versus. If you lose the A pawn, then it's a rook and a knight versus a rook. That's by and large not going to go very far. So let's have a look at this game in more detail. Okay, just to mention one other thing. I'm using a gaming headset now because I guess I was moving my head too much and clicking away too much on the keyboard in previous videos. Just see how this works in terms of consistency of sound quality. Okay, so let's have a look at this position. It's just the bishops have just come off, and this is a key blunder by White. And just think about what's going on here. How do you hold your A pawn? It's the key. The key to the position is holding A pawn. The 2 black pawns don't matter so much. Right. So what Kramnik did is take the F pawn, which is a mistake. And we'll just quickly look at what happens next few moves. Game continuation. Attack the pawn. Pawn has to advance. Take the other pawn. And now the rook goes behind. And as I've highlighted there, we'll come back to this position, but White's in a bind because the knight has to hold the pawn, the rook has to hold the knight. If the knight moves, the pawn drops. If the rook moves, the knight drops. So you can see by and large this is a sort of a stymied position and will be a draw. So let's go back to that position where rather than playing rook takes f7, there's a couple of winning moves. The clearest one is probably knight d5. Let's go through knight d5 and see what's happening in that instance, right? Just let's go through a typical continuation. Maybe rook a3 looks most logical to go behind the pawn. Rook's holding the pawn. Now the knight's going to help the pawn advance. Attack the knight. Take a pawn with check. All the squares are blocked. Hold the pawn again. But the difference now is that the king is trapped on the back rank and the knight is holding the pawn. Let's continue. This is just a computer line. Move the king up. We're going to pick up this pawn. and the king's going to support the pawn, and that will be a win. The key there is you can see that a pawn has been held, right? Okay, so that's why in this position, rook takes f7 was a mistake, and the knight should have been rerouted while there's time to do it, with the rook protecting the pawn at this point. Okay, so let's go back to game continuation. Rook takes f7, rook attacks the pawn. We've been in this position, check, king up, rook takes the other pawn, and now black gets behind the pawn, this frozen position we were talking about. So now what's going to go on, right? White has to advance his king, fair enough. And basically, the drawing technique here is that black should just keep his rook on the A file. Right, so this is now we're getting this second position, this second blunder here. You just go back, up and back on the A file, to the white king can't advance, can't sort of do anything, can't protect the knight, knight can't move, rook can't move off the 7th rank without losing the knight. Instead, Kasparov played rook to h1, losing move. However, quite interesting, there is only one winning move here, which white missed. Just have a look at the position. There's a very interesting endgame position this to have a detailed look at. King b2 was the line which does not win, and then black gets his rook around to the back rank, and we eventually devolved into this position. So the pawn dropped, and now we've just got what should be a drawn rook and knight versus rook. I mean, I wouldn't like to have to draw this in a real game, but that's played on for a few moves, played on for many moves actually, and drew then. So let's go back to this position where I said rook h1 is the second blunder. Now you saw that technique where what black did is went around to the 8th rank and then attacked the knight, and that was enough to enable the draw. So then the logical winning move was actually rook g8. Black can't do that anymore. A few possibilities. Black could check from the side, but that doesn't really help. I mean, the most logical one is, but let's go back to the A file and see what happens now. Check, and can't take the pawn because of the skewer. Can't take the pawn again because of a discovered check. And then now this is the key. We're holding the pawn, and now you can play on, but basically the pawn didn't drop, and then that's why white is winning. So that's one potential line, and then you go back to this position here. Let's say we check from the side. Maybe that was Kasparov's idea. Checking from the side was a drawing technique. But then what happens now is the king was going to come over, so we drop behind again. Check. Can't take the pawn because of the skewer. Discovered check. Can't take the pawn again. Hold the pawn, and then now it's different because the rook is holding the pawn, the knight is holding the pawn, so the pawn is not going to drop. And then now probably just work out king over, and we'll probably check here, force the king back. So you can see the difference there, that the whole key was quite tactical. Black had to ensure that he could pick up the A pawn, and actually going back to that earlier position, keeping the rook on the A file was the way to do that. Okay, so let's move on to the next game, which is game number 6. Just let me bring up the chart for that one. Okay, you can see the profile of this. White was attacking, Kramnik was attacking, gradually built up a winning position, +4, +3, and then he gave it away in a couple of moves. And this is let's have a look at the position. Check, king to g7, and now the next move basically throws away all the advantage. So have a look at what you might play. It's not a clear cut and dry kind of loss, but I think it's a good instruction in terms of like general sort of middle game strategy. What would you do in this position? Okay, so let's have a look at what he should have done. He should have played queen d5. Keeps the queen centralized, keeps the passed c pawn very dangerous. Just play a few moves on. Okay, we'll exchange off. Keep the queen centralized, make the king safe. And then the computer just thinks that white will be able to promote his pawn in this position. Black king is going to be distracted, and meanwhile, let's continue then. Yeah, let's continue this line. Takes back with king. Obviously winning. Let's go back and see what actually Kramnik played. He played queen to a8. Now that's obviously it's counterattacking a few pieces, which I've highlighted there, but the problem is it surrenders the center. Queen to d7 was played, and then now the issue is you can see that that'd be check, and then we've got this sort of diagonal checking motif. Maybe that's what Kramnik missed, so he decided to get his king out of dodge first. We move the queen up to d3, and you can see that opens up the b1 square and the h7 square, which would once again be a checking motif. Obviously, the king can come up, but doesn't work out too well. So g3, maybe Kramnik thought this is escaping it all. Knight f7. Now he's finally taken the pawn, but his queen is way decentralized. And I think that he can safely see that this just peters out into perpetual check. So that was a mistake by Kramnik, sort of giving up the center and then allowing black this counterattack, which ensured a draw. In fact, Kramnik was the one who bailed out to a draw in the end there. Okay, so that's game number 6. And now let's go to game number 10, which is, people regard that as just from a general perspective, the decisive game of the match. Kramnik got up 2 wins to 0. And this was quite an early mistake, this one. It was in the 19th move. Let's go to it. Okay, so here's the key position. You can see it's an IMSO, so knight b5. And you can see that there's, White's got his pawns shattered on the king side, but he has a very active and threatening queen. Now, the best move here is simply queen d3, queen d2, queen, mainly those moves, just keeping the queen active on the d file. Blunder was, okay, so probably a good tactical thing. Have a look at the continuations you can think about and see what the problem here is. Once you've thought about it, you can see probably the biggest danger here is the back rank of black, right? Quite exposed. He doesn't have an f-pawn. The knight can be activated quite quickly. So winning move is going to take the rooks off first because obviously our rook was attacked twice. And now that lets us move the knight in with tempo on the protecting the rook on c8. Rook has to move. Doesn't really matter where. Rook b8 as good as any other move. Check. King's got to move. You set up the smothered mate motifs. Kasparov could have resigned. Played h6 perhaps. That loses a pawn. Cover the f7 square, so no smothered mates. Check. Queen e7, and now it's all over. That was the game. Kasparov resigned. I guess the only sensible continuation, not really sensible, is give up the rook. Knight's got to come back. It's not gonna last, basically. Okay, so that was game 10. And you can see that quite early blunder. It was supposed to be mostly prep that game by Kramnik. Anyway, so I hope you enjoyed looking at those 3 games. And next time around, we will be looking at the match between Kramnik and Liko. Thank you very much for watching.